We've been doing this for over a year. It's hard to believe. A year.
I know, we only have like 20 some odd episodes.
Oh, that was a year of my life. What the fuck did I do? Nothing. Absolutely nothing.
That's not true. You bought a house, you bought a car.
That was a year and a half ago.
The house?
Yeah.
Fuck, really?
Yeah.
What have I been doing? Literally nothing's changed in my life.
You had a girlfriend and then you lost the girlfriend all within this. You're right back where you started.
Getting drunk on a Wednesday talking to you. Great. Welcome to Unqualified Opinion, a dumpster fire that's almost as bad as my dating life. How's it going, Scott?
Well, you don't have a dating life, so I'm not quite sure how that analogy makes sense.
It was just supposed to be a funny point that we move on from, but here we are stuck in it.
It's not accurate. You refuse to have a dating life.
That is not true.
Yes, it absolutely. You have. When
I
have
dated
you?
someone for like 8 months.
No, I mean, like seek out people to go on a date with.
That is true. I'm incredibly lazy when it comes to that.
If it falls into your lap, figuratively and metaphorically speaking,
Then about 50% of the time I'll take advantage. Maybe slightly less than 50% if it falls into my lap.
it's not for lack of ability. It is. So don't get me wrong. It's simply lack of trying. Anyway, that dumpster fire has gone out. So it is good. I'm doing good. I'm tired, and
We were talking before we started recording about your new position. Do you want to mention that?
yeah. So I have a new job that is going to be very similar to what I've done in the past, only at a higher level, and it's about connecting policy, informing policy programs and practices, which sounds cliche, but each one has a unique definition, with research at an R1 research institution, the University of Minnesota. So actually taking research and making it applied, pragmatic, impacting real people. So, and I'm going to be coordinating that.
Do you have any advice for any young people out there who are trying to reach a job that they are way underqualified for?
I'm very qualified for this job. I'm very qualified.
You know I'm kidding. I'm just fucking with you.
Do you know I was looking up, I was curious where my salary was going to fall within government, because I know it's on the higher end. And I was looking, and you can pull from the state of Minnesota all 77,000 jobs that they have. And each one has the person's name and their salary. And it's all public information. So I did this little sort, and I figured out that, now keep in mind the average tenure of someone in government is like 20 years. Maybe that's too much, but definitely over 10.
Yeah.
And the average age of these people is like in their late 40s. Average age. Average. A lot older, many a lot older. So I was looking at this. I will make in the top quartile of 77,000 employees at the age of 28. I am fast approaching the ceiling of government pay.
I don't know, Scott. It seems like you're going to have to think about coming over to the private sector. Join me.
No.
Join me.
No, I'm not joining. I don't. Oh, it depends what in the private sector. I might join academia. They pay more. Academia administration. I'd love that.
Oh, my God.
I'd
no.
love that.
Don't you dare become part of the bloated administrative structure of academia. You parasite, you. You know how much of an increase we've had in administration in academia? Oh, it's just like
there are actually a lot of valid reasons for that, but yes, there has been an increase.
Job security, is that your valid reason?
No, the increasing demands and competitiveness of research and education in the country. Like you see what these the vast majority goes to student expenses, and it's just supporting students. They demand a level of service that's like a 5-star hotel.
Like that one university that created a lazy river throughout their campus. Did you hear about this?
Yeah.
I don't remember exactly what it was. I think it was in that that Jonathan Haidt book that we did a review of.
Yeah.
I don't think it's fair to say that the bloating of services in order to attract customers, aka students, at a superficial level is a justified reason for having administrators, increased number of administrators, you know?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, it could be on some level. If you have to deliver higher and better and greater number of services, both on the research side and the education side, wouldn't that take more administration?
I mean, it will, and at a certain level, you can say that, yeah, we're already partway through this rat race of trying to find better, flashier attractions to bring students in. But at a fundamental level, it just frustrates me that it's like, these universities aren't supposed to be about, like, how do you create the coolest library and the coolest VR set and all this other, like, random shit that you put into college. It should be about, like, if you have additional money, cut down on the tuition, or pay professors more so that they have an attractive salary, or like give money to your grad students so that they can actually have a living wage. Like, stop spending on more administrators to attract more students. Like, it's just this treadmill.
You don't think they spend all of it on administration, though?
No, but the budget of administration has, like, it was some crazy statistic. I think it's like tripled in the last 20 years or something like that. Whereas for research and for professor salaries, it like has hardly gone up relative to administration.
Yeah, I don't know what to really contribute the growth to. I mean, it's not. I don't know. The problem is I know enough about academia to where I really know that it is extremely complicated, and there's a lot of incentive structures that are very, like, foreign to the private market. I'm not saying they're bad, but they're just hard to understand. It's a fascinating world. I mean, it really is. Academia is just culturally, I find really interesting.
Did I mention on the last episode? I don't know. I got a big pay raise. That was fun. Mm-hmm. My company has recently completed Series C, and so we have a bunch more money. So then they were looking at how our engineers are paid and realized that we are all severely underpaid. So they devised this new system for paying engineers where they take the actual kind of market salary for engineers at given positions, and for each position they give 2 salary bands, the 50% of market and the 75% of market, and then every engineer gets in every one of those positions gets either that 50% or that 75%, and there's no negotiation. So it's normalizing to compensate for negotiation skill, which, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of the company, should never really be a factor in what you get paid, right? You should get paid what your worth, and your worth should be defined by your position, not by how much you're able to strong arm a company coming in. And so I think that's cool. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on, like, that kind of philosophy?
Well, that's how government is paid. So I think it makes a lot of sense. I think it's really fair. Where the struggle comes in, of course, is classifying yourself to begin. I mean, now you have 2 job classes. Hennepin County has 6,000 job classes. I don't know how many thousands. A couple thousand job classes. Federal government, I'm sure, has tens of thousands. So that's like, so that there's 2 fights. There's the classification fight of looking at your job description and saying what class is that. That's really arbitrary and non-objective in some cases. Mm-hmm. And then you have the fight for promotion, because bands inherently create bottoms and tops, and you have to then, control. So if you're asking for a promotion, but that puts you into the next band of a higher job class, but you're not doing that work, it creates a lot of
resistance to movement.
Yeah. And so that's what I've seen as being kind of the trouble with that, is because now there's a market reason that they can say, and a cultural reason, a company culture reason, they can say, no, we're not going to pay you more because of this.
Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting for me is that so I came in at the position of a regular software engineer, and I was eventually promoted to senior. But I came in relatively low on my salary. So even though I had the senior position, and I only learned this recently, I was getting paid a lot less than the other senior engineers. And so my pay bump was one of the biggest bumps that they gave any engineers in the company, so that I was at the same level as the other engineers, right? And I have mixed feelings about that because on the one hand, I'm very happy because I got this huge bump. It's definitely going to reflect in my standard of living. And at the same time, it's really frustrating because if you look at my performance, I'm performing, I'm consistently getting top reviews as a senior software engineer, and yet I'm getting paid at the low end of my position, right? And so it's like I've been getting underpaid all of this time, and I'm not getting compensated for that. But
what do you think happens with the people who are overpaid? Do you think they're going to get a pay freeze?
No one got a pay freeze.
Well, as they told you, they're going to tell you people get pay freezes.
Well, no, I mean, they said to the company as a whole. So when they made this transition to pay bands, everybody got some kind of jump, right? Some people got significantly bigger than other people, but it was all to normalize. And they didn't, because of the politics around it, they didn't bump anyone down.
Oh, so it's systemically underpaid. It wasn't just certain positions. It was everyone.
Everybody was underpaid, right? Now, there is complexity there in which some people have certain positions that's kind of open to debate, right? Some people were able to negotiate a higher position when they came in relative to their work experience. So you might have someone who has like 5 years experience in the same position as someone with 2 years experience, which doesn't really make a lot of sense, right? In certain cases, it does, right? Sometimes you can have 2 years of experience and have gained a lot of knowledge, and comparative to someone with 5 years of experience, if that person's experience wasn't at like a particularly engaging company, then maybe they're roughly equivalent. But I've seen cases in which people were just able to negotiate the position and are now kind of locked in there as well. So it's just really complicated to figure out exactly how you negotiate that. But given all of that, I mean, compared to how bad it could be and compared to what I remember in my previous job, like the company's been doing really well, I think, figuring out. It's just a really complicated situation. It's a really thorny topic to bring up compensation because people kind of, put a lot of their self-evaluation of work on their position and what they're paid. So
right. It does help alleviate a lot, though. That's the thing with pay bands and clear criteria is that in the government, then you have also seniority. It's like you know how much each other makes, even if you don't look it up, because it's like you've been here longer, you're at a higher job class, you make more than I do. And it's just like, of course they do, because there is no other way about it, right? So there'd be no conceivable situation where there'd be gross pay inequities between staff, and people know that. So it's like you run your party, like you're a really low job class. I might pay for your drink because I know, and that I know that you don't make a lot of money.
Yeah.
So it does, and vice versa. Like my boss, who is I know 3 job classes above me. She makes a lot of money. So then it's like, okay, when she pays the first round of drinks, it's like everyone gets that, right?
Yeah.
Like, we know you can afford that. We can't.
Don't you think that also leads to some awkward dynamics, though, sometimes? Because now you know exactly kind of how big that gap is.
If that my opinion, if that led to awkward dynamics, you probably had awkward dynamics in the first place.
One thing for me is like, as an engineer, I get paid way more than a lot of the other people in the company. But I know a lot of people in the company who are really smart. And I do feel a little bit of that awkwardness of hanging out with them. They might be further along in life than me. They might have a family. They might be much more mature. And oftentimes for my company, understand the industry a lot better. And I'm still making like 30% on top of them.
My concept of that is your salary rarely has any bearing or correlation at all to the value you bring to the job. in many ways, that oftentimes, and most factors going into salary, it's not having anything to do with how smart you are. It's just based on the job class you're applying to, the type of work being done, the scarcity of that. Scarcity is huge, right? So if you have a scarce skill, you get paid more. I mean, that's just the way the market works. And it's just like, well, you have skills that are more in abundance. The jobs don't pay as much because it's just like, I don't know. It's nothing to do with them, as a person.
Why don't we talk about drinks? What are you drinking?
Just a bottle of wine. I mean, a glass of wine. Glass of wine, not a bottle.
Don't sell yourself short, Scott. The night is young.
No, it's actually a box. It's that same box as from last time.
Tell me more. What is it exactly?
Oh, actually, it's a different box. I don't want to go get it. I have to.
Assume we have new listeners who.
It's a box. It's a box of wine. It's a box of wine that's like a smaller box. It's like a bottle and a half box.
What's it called?
Bandit.
Bandit?
Maybe.
Are you... This is like the one thing we do, and you're not even...
Well, I don't have it in front of me.
Oh my God, go get it.
It is called Bandit. Oh, look at that.
All right, so Bandit, how is it?
It's a cab in a box. It's not bad. It's one of those classier boxes, It's not like it's a step above black box, which is not bad. But it's a little more premium, quote unquote, than the typical like black box or Boda box kind of thing. So
nice.
Yeah, it's not bad. It was cheap. It's $10 for a bottle and a half of fairly good wine. So, you?
I'm drinking this peated bourbon whiskey called J. Riddle, I think. Here, I'll show you.
Oh, it's cute. There's a little fox on it.
So there's a little fox with some, I don't know, like quintessential American wilderness in the background. It's like a bunch of trees and some mountains in the back, and then there's like a shoehorn wrapping the entire thing with $2.99 stamped on it, and then over that it says J. Riddle. Anyway, I really like the, what do you call this?
Logo?
The logo.
Label.
And label. Yeah, it says handcrafted peated bourbon whiskey. So I went to that fancy whiskey place that I told you about before that forgot to give me a bag that one time because I have nowhere else to go. And I was asking them for an interesting whiskey, and the guy said that this is the only peaty bourbon that they could find. And so, you know how I like to drink Laphroaig? You know Laphroaig? I was hoping it would be something kind of on that level, but it's not nearly as smoky. It's still really good though. Like it's a little bit sweeter. It's a little bit sharper of a taste, but I mean it's bourbon, so it's pretty different. But it's good overall. I like it.
It's pretty. It's a nice
it
bottle.
is. It's nice, and hopefully I will not be finishing the bottle.
Hopefully not. It is a Wednesday. I am assuming you have work tomorrow.
I do. Worst case scenario, I can work from home. So.
Thursday's almost Friday, and Friday is, Friday.
Friday is actually Valentine's Day. I didn't realize that until about 5 minutes before we started recording.
Well, just give yourself some self-love.
Whatever.
Take a bath in bathroom. I mean, sorry, your roommate's bathroom.
No, I'm good.
Light some candles. Put on some classical.
It's been what, like 3-4 weeks since the breakup now? Something
I think it's 3 or 4.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
I think 4.
And the first few weeks were pretty rough, and there was a night when I was pretty high, eating the last of my like edibles, that I was thinking a lot about it. But overall, I mean, the biggest thing is like I don't have someone who I can just turn to do stuff with, right? That convenience is something I miss.
Yeah.
That's the biggest thing. And obviously there's just like a lot of parsing through the history, but I think I've done a good job of kind of getting past it, all things considered. Anyway, let's move on to our actual topic. Or do you mind if I refill first?
Oh, you can refill. Isn't the bottle right there?
Yeah, but I need ice. So ice is over there.
I have this craving to order DoorDash.
Don't do it. Don't succumb. Stay strong. Whoops, that's way too much whiskey.
I really want a hamburger.
There was a partnership meeting, so like the company trying to meet with another partner. And so at work there was just a bunch of leftover salad. So the office manager guy was telling me that he was going to compost it, and it was this like giant bowl, like this big. And so it's like, do you want it? I'll wrap it up for you. So he like put a bunch of foil over it. I just like carried this thing, and I was going to gym afterwards, so I was just like carrying it to a gym, and with like with rain all over, so I was like carrying it in one arm, like just scooped in one arm with like my umbrella in the other arm, and then I got to the gym with this giant salad bowl. I had to put it in the locker, and it like wouldn't fit directly, so I had to tilt it. Strategically tilt it. Oh. Yeah, strategically tilt it so it doesn't fall, and like put it in. And so right before we started recording, I was just like wolfing down this salad. I couldn't finish it. It was too big for me to finish, and that's all I've eaten for dinner. Like, that's how big it is. And I eat a lot. So.
Yeah, you are going to have to eat. You're going to get hungry. You ate about probably 5 calories in the salad.
I know, right? No, it was one of those heartier salads.
Oh, yeah. I was just thinking it was lettuce or something.
No, it's like it had some avocado.
Oh,
and
one of those
beans in it and some others.
That's a real salad. That's a salad. Yeah, that's
it was the kind of salad that you present to business partners to impress them. Like, we can afford this salad, kind of thing.
We're a tech startup and we can afford a salad.
Not only that, we opt to choose for a salad.
God. I'm sure it was a very expensive salad, but in the scheme of things, I don't think it was very expensive.
At most, half of it was eaten. So fucking don't get so many salads. There were like 3 of them left over.
They're probably people took them. You know how much catering is?
Catering is so
they're
expensive.
Probably $100 a piece.
Oh, I bet.
I
mean, so we do these weekly catered lunches, which with the company getting bigger and bigger because we're in triple digits now, it's getting really unwieldy. But it's thousands and thousands of dollars every week to cater. Like, it's got to be like $20 to $25 a head.
If you could say, what if you took those thousands a week and did something else with the money? Not give raises, but like something else for like office culture. What would you say?
I really like the lunches. I think that the lunches are a good idea because it gets the whole team together. Okay. We usually have a speaker come in to chat to everybody, and it's a learning opportunity. Even on the days that we don't, it's an opportunity to reach out and talk to people that you wouldn't usually talk to. And the other thing is there's a history to it. It's always been there, not just since I started 2 years ago, but even before that, from the beginning of the company, this catered lunch concept. And so getting rid of it feels like you're really putting the nail in the coffin on the idea of it being a startup. Right? Like, we've gotten too big to do this, so we're not doing it anymore. We're no longer a startup kind of.
Yeah, they'll probably their budget one day. Be like, we just need $10,000 more somewhere. Oh, just the thing. They won't even notice.
Speaking of money and where to put it, our topic this week is universal basic income. Who knows when this is actually going to go out. This is coming right on the heels of the UBI candidate, Andrew Yang, being knocked out of the Democratic primary with the vote in New Hampshire. And UBI is now definitely not happening in the U.S. Although, to be honest, even if he somehow very improbably made it to the presidency, there's no way it would have passed. But as a concept, universal basic income is just the idea that as a citizen of a country, you have a right to various services within the country, and one of the easiest ways to provide those services is to give people money and say, hey, you know how best to supply your own needs. And so we're just going to give you that money, and then you can kind of figure out how you want to use it. The common argument that's used for UBI is to look at a state like Alaska, where they have a dividend for every citizen based on the oil money up there. And it's something that the citizens really like. And so, Scott, what are your kind of initial impressions and like your gut feeling about it?
If you look at who would really benefit, you're just doing a cost-benefit analysis, you're going to hone in on people who are, low income, typically people of color. And I think there's, given the resources, that there's probably other ways to go about distributing it that's more effective. But I think it works for countries that have the ability to fund it, such as those with a lot of natural resources like the Nordic countries and Alaska. It makes sense if you could do it that way, but that's not the reality of the continental U.S.
So is it fair to say that your thoughts are that if you had the option of implementing UBI, that money would be better spent toward more targeted social services? Is that your argument? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. So my opinion, I'm really kind of torn on UBI, so I want to use this as a way to just kind of provide devil's advocate to what you say and see how that forms my opinion. So I guess my devil's advocate opinion to that would be that if you look historically at what the government's been really good at, it's been giving out large sums of money. If you look at historically what the government's been bad at, it's been the nuance around determining exactly how to distribute resources and implement solutions that are context specific to certain groups of people, right? And so the argument for UBI in that case would be that the most effective and productive way that money could be used wouldn't be the kind of restrictive policy that requires hiring a lot of people to sift through data to figure out who deserves certain kinds of programs, and then provide restrictive rules and build those rules and like fund the building of those rules, and then fund the implementation of those rules around how to make sure that people are following the exact kind of regulations around receiving money, and then making sure that money is being used in exactly the way that the government deems it should be used, right? And that a much more cost-effective solution would be to just say like, hey, we have all these people, just give them all the money. And then the other point on that being that what it does is it enables people, especially those who would get the most value, which is low-income people, to choose exactly how they would use the money. The reason being that much more than a top-down government approach and the government saying, this is exactly what you need, most people know how best to use their money. They know what is most pressing and important for them to invest in.
Yeah, I think it makes sense if you have enough money to fund something like that. Again, going back to Alaska and the Nordic countries, then I think it makes a lot of sense. I would be interested to think about whether the cost you'd save in administrative burdens would be balanced by the amount you'd be giving out. Now, I guess that's sort of hard for me to understand.
How do you mean hard for you to understand?
Wouldn't you think that if you were giving someone $10,000, say, that it wouldn't cost $10,000 to figure out who that $10,000 would go to?
Oh, no, definitely not. But it would take a lot of overhead to figure out if they're using the money in the way that you want them to, right? Like if you have a government program around food stamps, for instance, right? Then there's a lot of overhead that's used in terms of making sure that you have places where food stamps are accepted, making sure you have a finance system to make sure that those companies are reimbursed, making sure that you're figuring out who's eligible for food stamps versus not eligible for food stamps, right? Making sure they have legal regulations and a continual process of updating for what is allowable to purchase on food stamps. I don't know if that's a thing still. Maybe it's not. Maybe you can purchase anything on food stamps. I don't know. You know what I mean, though?
Well, but all that is done on a local level, right? So you have a huge cost with that because every single one of the 3,000 plus counties in the country has to replicate that for itself.
Are food stamps done on a local level?
Yes, really? Almost all government services are done on a local level.
Oh, that's tough.
So that, yes, would be very burdensome. But programs that the federal government runs, namely Social Security, that's close to the only one. Housing finance is another one.
Well, here's the thing, right? Social Security would be really similar to something like UBI because it's
right,
kind of across the board, right? You're not making a lot of value adjustments on who gets.
Oh, you're a lot. I mean, Social Security is very complex on the amount you receive. It's not just everyone gets this. It's based on a very complex calculation of earning patterns and age.
But once you codify the rules into an algorithm, you just run that based on someone's employment and tax returns, right?
Right. Well, and I would imagine you could do the same thing with more targeted income, and we do that through tax breaks already. And that's, I mean, in that case, you're putting the algorithm. Not the government doesn't even control the algorithm. TurboTax controls the algorithm, right? So what the government says is, well, if you software companies develop your own software, we'll let you to do taxes. We'll let you do that if you don't charge for people who earn below a certain amount. And they say, okay, deal. So all the tax companies, they're the ones footing the bills for creating these algorithms. When the government comes up with something, such as a UBI or Social Security or whatever, it has to do it with Social Security, but it would do it with UBI because that's actually an income. That's different than Social Security because you'd get it every single year from the year you were born, and it would be based on a complex calculation for sure, but a complex calculation that is done by an algorithm of your family size, perhaps your geography, income.
Here's the thing. It's a really good point, but I think that as long as you can codify the requirements based on data, it's not going to have a lot of continual overhead, right? What I'm more curious about is something like, and again, I don't know a lot about this, but like disability, for instance. I assume, and I might be wrong here, and you probably know better than me, but I assume you actually have to go in and file for disability and like actually meet someone and like have that human interaction.
Disability is hard. Yeah, it's going to be more expensive.
So when I make the argument that something like UBI, which the government is aligned to be able to do, right? Just like give money away, right? Like take money, put it in someone's hands, is going to be a much more cost-effective way of distributing money than something like disability would be.
Right, and it would be also extremely cost-effective to target the UBI. In that case, it wouldn't be universal because you wouldn't have. I mean, it would be the same thing as a Social Security idea. Is that based on, let's say, you have your income, you have your gross income. Filed for taxes. Then you take your gross income, and then you look at your net value, and then you look at your earnings, and then you look at your age, and then you look at your family. What do your family earn? All that goes to the taxes anyway. Yeah. You'd just be taking that and saying, well, instead of a X size tax break or tax credit, you get a Y sized tax credit because of the numbers you put in. We already do that with taxes, right? We already are doing that exact same thing.
Yeah.
So why couldn't you just factor in a UBI, a really large tax credit? I mean, boom, there you go. You just get a bigger tax credit.
But are you talking about a consistent tax credit? So the Andrew Yang version being like $1,000 a month, regardless of anything? Or are you talking about weighting that based on income?
Yeah, exactly. What could happen is, well, say Andrew Yang says, or whoever says 1,000 for everybody. Well, you give 1,000 to someone, but then they have a life crisis. Their wife loses work, or their husband loses work. They're down to one income. They have two kids. They file for taxes again. They say this happened to us. Yeah. Well, now it's that 1,000. They get 3,000, or 10,000 or whatever, right?
I see what you're saying.
To help them over that. Now, say they said, well, I won the lottery. I mean, that's silly. I got a really high paying job. Like my uncle hooked me up. I'm now making 6 figures. Mm-hmm. Okay, maybe then it's not going to go to zero. Social Security doesn't go to zero, but it go down a little bit. Okay, maybe you only get $500 a month or $250 a month. And
I mean, I see what you're saying. It's a really interesting concept. It isn't UBI though, and
no, I'm not. That's what I'm saying. It's not UBI. But I think it's a more effective way.
It's also really difficult to discuss something like that, given the fact that we have an income tax that will most likely counterbalance any kind of positive gain of something of that sort with the government service. But
but a lot of times when you get that kind of income, it would be we wouldn't get taxed on it, right? It would be write off. Like you wouldn't get taxed on the money you would get from the government.
Yeah. So this is more of a moral question than it is like a implementation question, right? And so assuming we have this proposal for UBI, which is that everyone gets whatever it is, $1,000 a month, let's say $1,000 a month. In most cases, because we have to raise taxes in order to account for that money that we're distributing.
Not necessarily. I would actually argue you may be able to cut taxes if you do it right. You might be able to cut taxes.
I mean, there are implementation details, right? Like you can make it optional for people who are already under the social services. So you can choose like keep your own system versus decide on the UBI, but you can't get both, right? You can do some stuff. Andrew Yang was talking about like a value added tax. Like there are all sorts of ways. Like sure, let's say that that's possible. But for people who are earning, say, high 6 figures, like obviously they're not going to be getting an actual $1,000 a month. They're gonna see some slight reduction in their taxes, but that's all it's going to be, right? Given that kind of policy, would you be morally opposed to the idea of making it a flat amount of money regardless of your income? Like once you hit like 18 or whatever it is.
Well, I'm not morally opposed to it. I just don't think it makes any sense. That's just my opinion. I mean,
So to make you dig deeper, what would be, in your opinion, the moral argument for doing it that way? For making it universal, specifically saying consistently every single person gets that?
I don't really see a moral part of it, I guess. I mean, I see it through it might be easier to pass if it's a Republican Senate or a legislature, if you say everyone gets the same amount. So that's how I would see it. I think that's also why a lot of policy that comes out of Washington is really stupid, is because you make concessions and change things to get it by the political party that is in power. So, yeah, I think UBI probably has a better chance of passing than what I described, because that is...
Oh, 100%.
Right?
But to steelman this a little bit, and not just kind of throw it off as a concept, I think there is a way to justify at a moral level this idea, right? If you can frame UBI as this is what you get as a citizen of a country, as someone who has the right of claiming citizenship, whether you were born here or you became a citizen, as someone who invests as a citizen in building a social dynamic, building a community, having a job, doing community service, as part of that, as engaging in the economy and building out the society, you deserve to benefit from the environment that promotes the kinds of economic growth that allows big companies to get built, that allows the government to provide services, that allows us as a society to continue to grow, right? As a citizen, and as an equal citizen, everyone has an equal right to some kind of valuation of that societal benefit, right? That dividend that you get as a member of this community. And now if you frame it that way, it suddenly becomes very much more unequal if you're saying that some people get more of it than others. What are your thoughts on that?
I guess that kind of describes what America was like in the 1920s. That's the America of the 1920s. So I think, I guess, wouldn't you think that argument would work better then than it would now?
I think that this argument has a hard time working with people who are steadfast capitalists and don't recognize kind of the communal aspects of the society we live in.
I mean, isn't that why it works really well in countries like the famous ones, of course, are the Nordic countries. But it's so much more homogeneous, and it's so much more equitable, far more equitable than we are.
Yeah, you don't have the massive income disparities that we have.
Yeah, people buy into that a lot. There's a stronger culture there.
Yeah, there's a culture of like, hey, we're all in this together. We all deserve to like be a part of this.
Yeah.
Than we do here. So yeah, no, and all of these are just like thoughts I'm throwing out. I really am not sure where I land on this. And if you don't mind me pivoting a little bit, I want to express my primary concern with the idea of a UBI. And you know, there are a lot of things that people throw out, right? One of the big ones is this idea of like, oh, if you just have UBI, then people don't have to work, and then work ethic, yada, yada, yada. I don't really buy that, right?
That have to be a lot of UBI.
Yeah.
Like 80,000 a year.
I mean, honestly, if people were getting 80,000 a year, then I think that people would stop working, right? I think that when it's a small stipend, it could maybe alleviate some struggles for people and allow them to become more effective at their job or more creative, or like work on that side business, and maybe that becomes something, you know? But I do think there is a real concern with having a politician come in and say, hey, I'm going to give you all $1,000, right? It sounds great until the next politician says, vote for me and I'll give you $2,000. And then suddenly the government is a bank that's just leveraged for political purposes. Which candidate is going to offer more government money, taxpayer money? And are we comfortable just electing whoever does that? It's a really slippery slope when you open that door to saying, hey, vote for me and I'll just give you money directly.
Yeah, I could see that. I don't know. I think that's a hypothetical. I guess I could see reasons that wouldn't happen either.
I don't know. I guess, and again, this is not supposed to be like some Andrew Yang tribute podcast now that he's out of the race or anything, but
go ahead, Steve.
No, I'm just saying, like, his big argument was that with automation, we're facing a new industrial revolution that's going to throw a lot of people out of work, and this is going to exacerbate a lot of the issues that we see with economic security, and, you know, chain on ancillary effects of that, whether it be the opioid crisis or just increased violence and racism, stuff like that. And his solution being give people enough that they can transition into this new economy, and they can figure out with that money how best to make that move, right? And honestly, if we are in the doomsday scenario that he's talking about with automation, then we're already fucked, right? The other note is that I'm not convinced that the best decision for handling an automation crisis, which I'm not saying doesn't exist, because I'm the first one to say I think there are many signs that are incredibly problematic around how automation is affecting our economy, right? Not to get into that topic. But I'm not convinced that the best way to solve that is just say like, hey, we'll give you a little bit more money, you'll be fine, right? People hold a lot of value in their work, right? And a lot of people have their identity housed in what they do. And especially for men, even if you have money, if you don't have like purpose in a job, you tend to struggle with depression and violence and all this stuff, right? Men are simple. Like you just point them to a thing and you say, do this thing. And then they're like, yes, I have a purpose in my life now. I'm so satisfied. And then they do it. And then if the robots do all the things for them, then they get all sad and get hooked on opioids.
Oh my God. I think Andrew Yang has identified a lot of the problems, but he hasn't really identified a tool necessarily in UBI, in my opinion. I guess because I see, this idea that, Steve, you talked about, like everyone feeling they're contributing to society. The fact we don't have that in this country is a deep problem. And it's not for the lack of UBI. It's something else. There are a lot of systemic cultural and social issues. They're all wound up in this and are in some ways more important, in some cases, than the actual reality. And in some cases, completely subsume reality. And UBI isn't some government intervention, but whatever it is, UBI or whatever, isn't going to fix that. I guess. I guess that's what I think.
So here's a question. Do you ever think UBI will happen here?
I don't. Has there been a country that has identified a resource that they can draw on and feed into the national bank and pay out?
Saudi Arabia.
Is there a country that doesn't do that but has a UBI?
Oh, that doesn't do that and has a UBI.
That's what I'm curious about, or like a substantial UBI.
I don't think so. I think it's been tested in one of the Nordic countries in a few cities, and then they had to back off because it wasn't effective at all.
Not only from the efficacy standpoint, but the funding standpoint. That's where I'm like, are we actually ever really have it? Because unless you have oil gushing out of the ground that is completely, at your disposal to sell, then it's hard to find that untapped liquid income that's like in addition to your economy.
If UBI is predicated on having some kind of income based on a resource of that sort, then it's fundamentally untenable for most countries, right?
Well, but is it? I mean, it could be, and this is really hard because you can't really do studies on this, but what if UBI or some version thereof radically decreased the expenditures of social services, right?
Yeah.
And offset it in that way. Well, that's really hard. There's been micro studies that suggest that can happen on very small, like programmatic scales. Mm-hmm. We actually did one at the county where we trained people in a pathway for entry-level position at our expense, and then tracked their earnings over time and their use of services, and then the cost of those services. And they actually began paying back more taxes to the county than the cost of the original services, and some so we could pay off the investment.
Which is a great argument for more investment in our fundamental educational institutions. Mm-hmm. But I don't think it's necessarily an argument for UBI, because the leap that you would have to make is that giving people money directly would translate to being just as effective as going in and training them.
Well, training is different. I mean, and that's another aspect, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you really need housing or food, it's pretty clear what you should spend that money on. Both it should make sense to you, and also it is where you should spend your money, right? But if you're up towards the top where you've gotten, to the point where you could go to school or you could do something.
If you're like us,
then it's like, why do I really spend that money? I mean, like, what would add value to the economy? Like, oh, I'm gonna buy a nice car, or I'm gonna buy a really nice kitchen table.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I can't speak for you, but I know that I wouldn't be using that money very productively.
Yeah.
I mean, it would probably do one of two things, right? Go to the high interest savings account I have set up to pile up for a mortgage, or go to that extra bar night that I'm gonna accidentally go on consistently every Thursday from now on because I somehow have the money to be able to do that. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. One is slightly better than the other, but honestly, neither of those things are injecting direct value into the economy. Not really.
Well, not as much as it would be to be able to buy food and a roof so you don't die of exposure in Minnesota. Like, that's a lot more expensive because they have to go to the coroner's office, you have the autopsy report, the sheriff's report.
Or even better, give you enough money so that you don't have to do the second job so you have time to get an education.
Yeah. Well, I think that we agree that the idea of some kind of liquid income, at least on some scale, makes sense. I think maybe there's discussion to have about like the size, like who all gets it. So in that case, I think that's universal, but I'm more on like the targeted side.
And again, not to beat a dead horse, but the thing that's really appealing to me is the idea of giving people autonomy and agency to choose how they use the money, right? And I think a lot of our government services now, in the way that we fund certain, certain activities is with low income households, is really kind of parental in a demeaning way. It's this idea of saying we're going to give you this money because we think you need it, but we don't trust you to use it correctly, so we're going to tell you exactly what you have to do, right? And that philosophy, I feel like, leads to more overhead, and it also leads to this top-down approach that doesn't really recognize what people actually need in their day-to-day, because at the end of the day, the person who knows how to lift themselves up and improve their lives is that person more than anyone else, right? Unless you're like crazy addicted to drugs.
I think the really interesting aspect of that is, in my experience, people recognize that we don't want to be doing it this way, that we want to give people a lot more autonomy. But the challenge is the history of poverty programs in this country is a long history, and it's a history that started out with the conception of poor people as being morally degenerate. Like, saw them, you're poor because you're not working hard enough, right? And that idea of government coming in and being the parent was born decades and decades and decades ago. And that has informed the policy structure and how everything is set up. And once you start tying federal funding to these systems, it's really hard to change them. It is really, really hard to change them because it has financial, like if you change it and are more flexible, the government, the state government, and then through the federal government, if you're coming from there, will say, well, no, you filled out form 1C on appendix D incorrectly. You aren't getting your money, you know? But there's a reason behind that. There's a reason it developed this way. But it's really hard to change it. And that's the frustrating part with government. It's like we want to change, but it's just there's so much.
And that's why we have people throwing their hands up and saying, hey, it's not the best solution, but here's UBI. Like, maybe it'll cut through the red tape. We'll just make it so simple that it's like a hot knife through all of the jargony baggage and bullshit. And just like get something that's slightly more effective.
And the thing is that only federal government could do that. But it has been shown on a local level that when you give people more agency, they make better choices, and it's actually more affordable in the long run. That's pretty undeniable at this point. So,
I guess the question is just how do you get there?
How do you get there?
I feel like that's a good place to wrap it up.
That's a good place to end. I have no closing soliloquies, but
You already did. You had something about the nuance of policy and how historically it builds up and stuff. You always end on something like that. Yeah, I think that was good. So we'll just end it on that. Sounds good. Cool. All right. See you next week.
See you next week.
Wait, maybe not. We'll see. See you in a few weeks. Oh, we should say for the 5 listeners who do keep up with the podcast, we will be reading a book and doing another book review. Scott's going to be out next week, and I'm going to be out the 2 weeks after that. So it's going to be about a month until the next episode. But we will be reading Uncanny Valley, a memoir by Anna Wiener. This was Scott's recommendation. It is supposedly a book about one woman's experience in Silicon Valley working for, startups in that culture. And Scott wanted us to read this. Because I work in a startup, although not in Silicon Valley, and it seems very interesting so far. I'm 10 pages in. It's very entertaining. The way she references and talks about companies that we all know, but she's not explicitly naming, is fucking hilarious. So I'm excited to read the rest of the book. We'll see what happens.
I'm too. I'm going to bring it backpacking with me. So.
Yes, you should. All right.
All right. See you later.
Don't die out there.
Yeah, I'll be fine.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.